So the epilogue number stemmed from just two almost unrelated desires on my part. I knew that I wanted the movie to end with them not together, but seeing each other again after some time had passed. The other thing I definitely wanted to do, because why the hell doesn't anyone do this anymore, was do a giant dream ballet. It's incredible to think today that the dream ballet was actually a thing in Hollywood. Mainstream Hollywood studio movies would do this as a regular thing in the 50s and 60s. It's not just American in Paris, it's The Bandwagon, it's Sin in the Rain, it's A Star is Born. It's this incredible moment in movie history where the pinnacle of like commercial, business-minded, Hollywood factory system movie making coincided with the most avant-garde, experimental approach to cinema you can possibly imagine. And it's never happened since in movie history.
Given that that is the case, the inclusion of a dream ballet in La La Land could have been an abrupt swerve late in the game, had the film's playful structure not readied the audience for it from the very beginning. Indeed, the success of this sequence, which presents a hypothetical alternative to the narrative that the audience has just seen, a fantasy version in which the lovers are not forced to break up, but are able to reconcile their ambitions with their relationship, is reliant on an element of the film that has been little talked about. His practice of tying the building and release of narrative tension to the deliberate frustration of expectations. Not just in the sense that the critic Jonathan Rosenbaum suggests, where the musical numbers can be seen as interruptions to misery and diverse irritations and frustrations, but in the way that the film constructs narrative expectations for its audience and then consistently frustrates them. And so, if the movie's opening and closing production numbers are by far the most powerful and impressive, as Rosenbaum suggests, it is because the film plays a long game and lays the groundwork for its rhapsodic conclusion in its opening, planting expectations for the audience that they didn't realise they had been given. The film opens with the grotesque traffic jam in which both Mia and Sebastian are stuck. Initially, we follow Mia and are given an impression of her unfulfilling life and frustrated ambition, but at a crucial juncture, the film, using a very neat sonic transition, cuts back to the traffic jam and we start to follow Sebastian. A legitimate skepticism could be expressed regarding this conceit of following Mia and then circling back to follow Sebastian, especially given that the rest of the film is told in a mostly straightforward and linear way, at least until the epilogue. However, La La Land justifies its structure, as the circularity with which the first act is told creates narrative expectations that would have been impossible to set up as effectively had the story been told linearly. When we first arrive at the restaurant having followed Mia, we only see that her interest is being piqued by Sebastian's music, and then we are left hanging as we are cut off before we get the chance to see how she reacts. However, the fact that we are taken back to the same initial starting point implies that both narrative blocks are contemporaneous. And so, just as the second segment starts at the same point as the first, so too we can expect it to climax at the same place. And this expectation creates a sense of anticipation. The audience wants to see the outcome that they were denied the first time around, and the film emphasises this anticipation in a variety of ways. Firstly, notice how in the second run, the shot of Mia is a close-up and not a medium like before. By attaching a different visual cue to the same situation, it emphasises the anticipation, not of the character, but of the audience. There is more at stake for us narratively this time around, thus we have an increased investment. But then the film delays the anticipated climax, their first meeting, thereby extending the anticipation, which heightens the stakes. And that tension is perfectly captured in this shot. Though the framing may seem quite simple, there's a lot of tension to it. Firstly, there is the conflict in the actual framing. Mia is out of focus, but she's given prominence. Sebastian is in focus, but he's smaller in the frame. So what is the actual focus of this shot? Well, because of the prominent position in frame left, we read the shot as being from Mia's perspective. This is emphasised by the plunging depth of the frame along with the placement of light, which draws our attention to the conflict happening in the far right background. And that's the point, it's visually communicating the anticipation that both Mia and the audience feel. And so when we start to move forward, that acts as a release of tension both narratively and visually. The camera moves forward and closer as the characters move from the edge of the frame towards the centre, anticipating. This is precisely what I mean about the film creating expectations for the audience, building tension out of the anticipation of them, and then deliberately frustrating those expectations. So when the Dream Ballet finale begins by transporting the audience back to this point in the narrative, so that the characters are able to rectify this missed opportunity, it satisfies our expectations whilst being at the same time a completely unexpected turn of events. And this is the benefit of this circular approach, the non-linear approach. Had the film cross-cut between the two segments, like a more conventional film, the significance of the return to this particular scene would have been undermined, as we would have only been to this restaurant the once and not had our expectations built, frustrated, and then, in the end, unexpectedly satisfied. So given that we have these two competing impulses that coalesce in the film's finale, how does the film actually set up the dream? If we look at An American in Paris, which is the prototypical example of a dream ballet, you can see that we have a push into a close-up of Gene Kelly, followed by a dissolve which clearly positions the sequence to come as his fantasy. The dissolve acts as an expression of his interiority, in that the concrete reality around him fades away and another more expressive reality seeps through. As a visual conceit, using a dissolve to transition between the external and the internal dates back quite far, so An American in Paris is using what was even then a fairly standardised bit of film grammar. However, what we see in La La Land is more complex, as it falls in line with the film's strategy of withholding information, in this case visual information. We have a 3-shot sequence which, though is based around the simplest bit of film grammar there is, shot, reverse shot, is rather sophisticated in the relationship it creates between those shots. So let's break it down. In shot number 1, the camera moves from a wide to a medium on Sebastian, and there are 2 things to note here. Firstly, the transition in light. When we start on wide, everything is clearly lit. We can see the surroundings and the other people in the space. However, as we move closer, the spotlight comes up, which exclusively highlights Sebastian, throwing everything else into darkness. This works in tandem with the movement of the camera. The closer the shot, the narrower the field of view. Our focus is being more specifically directed. And secondly, the shot is still moving when it cuts to the reverse. You can see this more clearly when the shot is slowed down. The reverse echoes the function of the previous shot. We start on wide, as we move closer the light changes. The ambient light drops away and the spot comes up, which has the effect of dislodging Mia both spatially and temporally, whilst matching the previous shot Sebastian. The manipulation of light ties them together whilst separating them from everyone else. What is important to note here, however, is that unlike the previous shot, it moves from a wide to a close-up, and the camera does come to a stop, pausing slightly on the close-up. And that sets up shot 3, which is a close-up on Sebastian, and the fact that it is a close-up is important. Firstly, it makes intuitive sense. Close-ups are emphatic in their effect, and the implication here is that the move to close on Mia emphasised her emotional engagement, thus the reverse is the subject of that engagement. And because she's concentrating so intently on Sebastian, he occupies more of the frame, but in so doing, he hides more of the space around him. And this is interesting because this close-up is implied to be the conclusion of the camera movement seen in shot 1. As previously mentioned, the camera in that shot was still moving when it cut away, and that suggests it still had further to go. Thus we intuit that this shot would have been its climax. Of course they're not the same shot, but the fact that Sebastian occupies such a large portion of the frame that there's nothing else to focus on clouds that fact, and so the rapid pull out to the reveal also pulls the rug from under our feet. So it is the reverse of Mia that does the heavy lifting with this sequence. Because we're so involved with the emotionality of the scene, drawn in by the use of close-ups, we're distracted from the tricks the film is playing on us. Because by layering the shots in this way, the reverse of Mia hides the transition, from which the fantasy seeps through. And because of this misdirection, because the transition is hidden in plain sight, and because of the lack of an explicit visual signifier such as a dissolve, on first viewing at least, it is not immediately clear that we've moved into a dream sequence. So when this happens, it really does take us by surprise. In looking at the dream ballet in this way, I hope to have pointed out larger narrative schemes and formal practices that the film uses that make it more interesting than perhaps it was given credit for. Because whilst there are legitimate criticisms to be levelled at La La Land,
you guys know I save jazz, right?
there are also aspects of it that deserve much closer attention than it has really been given.
How are you going to be a revolutionary if you're such a traditionalist? You're holding on to the past.
but jazz is about the future.
Particularly with the film's indebtedness to its own genre, the musical. Instead of merely pointing out similarities or references, it's a more worthwhile pursuit to try and understand how the film uses the framework of an older genre to try and tell a more contemporary story.
Oh, come on.
What I was really interested in, what I'm still interested in, is how do you take the traditional Hollywood-style musical, which is the most artificial genre that exists in a way, how do you take that and marry it to real life? How do you use that genre to really say something about what it feels like to live life, live everyday life, the kind of everyday emotions and heartbreaks and hopes and yearnings that we all go through?